who sometimes feels like you're navigating a vast ocean all by yourself? It's a common experience that as the needs of our loved ones grow, our world feels like it's shrinking. Join me as I dive into why this feeling is so prevalent among caregivers. Join me as my guest and I explore the contributing factors and, more importantly, offer practical solutions to help you build connections and avoid this all too common challenge that can lead to burnout and worse. Welcome to Fading Memories, your source for all things dementia caregiving. I'm your host, Jen Fink, and I have had 3 generations of loved ones with dementia, and I'm here to share the knowledge I've gained with you. Welcome back, Fading Memories listeners. I'm Jen Fink, your host and caregiver best friend. With me today is Beverly Thorne. She is the author of the book, Before I Lose My Own Mind, and we are going to be talking about why caregivers feel so alone in this journey, considering there's 15, 16 million of us. That's kind of surprising, and what we can do about it. So thanks for joining me, Beverly.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. I know we've chatted before, and this is our first formal chat, so that's exciting for me. Yeah. As you know, I was my husband's caregiver for a number of years before he died with Alzheimer's dementia. Just so happens I'm a psychologist, and my area in clinical psychology was helping people cope with chronic illness, chronic pain being the main thing that I did, but helping people cope with chronic illness and coming up with the best treatments possible for those coping strategies for them and for their family members who are often quite affected. And then my husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia. And I realized that I was going to be helping him cope with this chronic and life-limiting illness, but I was also going to have to pay attention to my own coping. And most of the resources I found back then, we were talking 2008-ish, most of the resources that I found were really more about helping the person with dementia cope better, do things without a complaint, helping distract them, do this for them, do that for them. But there wasn't a whole lot for caregivers to help themselves cope with this very long-term and trying illness.
Yeah.
So I went into that and I started journaling, and that was very therapeutic for me. And that was actually one of my ways of coping is I journaled about the funny stuff, the sad stuff, the tragic stuff, the infuriating stuff. And I also joined some online websites, which were terrific for me, online Facebook support groups. And I went into them feeling like, this isn't really for me. And I almost immediately felt very comfortable. The nice thing about those is there's somebody on there 24/7 because they're from everywhere. They're from the United States, they're international. So even if you're up at 3 o'clock in the morning tearing your hair out, wondering what to do, there's somebody on there. And I started posting a little bit, and people started saying, you need to write a book. And eventually I decided I'll give it a try. And so it's finally coming out, and I'm excited about that. And it's really written for the caregiver. I think we need more resources for the unpaid caregiver, unpaid dementia caregiver in particular.
Definitely. We need a top-down, bottom-up approach. I think there's a role for the government to play. Obviously, they cannot and probably should not take over, like, helping out like 100% because we can't afford that, physically or financially.
Right.
There's a role for corporations to support people so they can continue working, because we can't just have, everybody in my generation, I'm Gen X, just, well, I don't have a choice. I have to leave work.
Yes.
That's not good for them, for their, generations that are after them, or The companies, they're losing money. I mean, it's just across the board not great. So there's easy things for corporations to do, and then we need to do more to support each other,
Mhm.
within the family, within the community. And I think there's more of that than the other two things. Hopefully, we can
Yeah.
change the other two things.
Yes.
When I became responsible for my mom after my dad passed away in 2017, I didn't find a lot of beneficial sharing. I've never been a huge or I haven't been a big Facebook user since 2012.
Mhm.
Um, and all the groups that I ended up in just seemed like a lot of whining. And there'd be like all these prayer emojis or crying I'm like, how is that beneficial? Like, I just find that so irritating. And you
Uh-huh.
certainly did not share your loved one on social media. And then my
Right.
mom died at the start of the pandemic in 2020. And poof, everybody's sharing their loved one on the internet. I'm like, I,
Yeah, I noticed
well,
that too. I didn't do that. I wasn't comfortable doing that.
there's a lot of people that share a lot. There's some that share their journey with little glimpses of their loved one. I kind of like that a little bit better.
Mhm.
I have a few videos with my mom. She had some habits that I felt were beneficial to share, showing what advanced Alzheimer's look like. Like
Yeah.
one of my one of the favorites is a air quote kind of thing is she would walk literally 10 or 15 feet behind me. There was no convincing this woman to walk next to me, in front of me, and I understood that peripheral vision becomes an issue.
Mhm.
And, but I was just like, if I slowed down, she would slow down. If I
Right.
stopped, she was, I mean, it was
Right.
like,
And I've read that before. Yes.
yeah,
Yes,
it
I've
was
read that
insane.
before. Yeah.
Until one of my past guests, this is after quite a while after mom passed away, had the realization that my mom was the oldest of four and a mom and a grandma. So she was watching the kids. I'm like, oh,
Oh, yeah.
like, thanks
That
for
helps.
telling me now.
The context helps, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And
My
that's,
husband My husband used to always walk on the outside of a sidewalk closest to the street. And I was never used to, and before dementia, I was
mm,
never used to that, a man doing that, but he always insisted on doing that. And he finally explained one day before he had dementia that this was in case a errant car came at us, that he would get it first and he would save me. But he kept that up when he had dementia, and then it wasn't quite as safe. And so I had to deal with that, and we both had to move over a little bit away from away from the curb. Yeah. But it is so interesting and fascinating what happens during the course of the progress of dementia. It's interesting and fascinating from an objective point of view, but when you're in the middle of it, it does tend to make you feel like you're going to lose your own mind because things are changing. Things
mm-hmm.
change. It's a gradual disease, as you know, it's a gradual disorder, but it's only going one way, really. It's a life-limiting disorder, and it is ultimately going to cause death. Um, and along the way, they need a lot of care, and
Mm-hmm.
it is exhausting and it's anxiety producing. And my sense is from working with clients too, is, we go into this caregiving trek with very little preparation. Yeah.
And most of us end up because of some emergency. And then we're like, what the
Yeah.
hell?
Yes. Yes. And there we are. And I was lucky because I was eligible to retire. I had worked at the University of Alabama for 30 years and I had a good retirement. I was eligible to retire. I wasn't going to retire at that point, but I needed to retire and I did. And I was very lucky in that regard. And I realized there's so many caregivers that aren't that lucky. And and that brings on a whole load of stress in a different dimension than I had to deal with. There's so many dimensions of stress for the caregiver in this journey, as they call it, the journey. And it's years long. It's not a months long. It's sometimes decades long, and it's ever changing. So caregivers are constantly needing to adapt what they do and how they do it and bring in reinforcements if they can. I talk a lot in my book about how to ask for help and you're not always going to get it, but to give yourself permission to ask in the first place. A lot of us think we're supposed to do this on our own. It's not something we can do on our own. And to be able to ask and ask again and ask appropriately and accept help is a really important coping.
So, since you're a psychologist, do you have any insight as to why we're so reluctant to ask for help? I mean, is it just like our culture or just us stupid humans? It's
Well, it's not just us stupid humans because other cultures are not as independent oriented. Um, the United States tends to be a very much independent, especially European Americans tend to be, I came up on my own bootstraps, whether we did or not, and I'm independent by golly, and I should be able to do everything myself. And so we're less likely to give ourselves permission to ask for help. We're less likely to have an extended family around us that is enculturated to help, especially with older generations. That's part of it. Move them into the house, help take care of them, revere elders. That's really not part of the U.S. culture, which I think makes it more difficult for all of us, caregivers and people with disorders.
well, I know because older Americans are like, oh, I'm going to live in my home forever and I'm going to be independent. And it's like, well, that's great. What's your plan for that? What's your plan if that doesn't happen? And, probably 99% of us don't have one because
Right.
we don't want to talk about the what if, but
Right.
reality is 70% of us need care before we die. And, that's pretty much, 7 in 10. That's a good high number. But I
Yes.
think we all just assume that, by the grace of God, or I work out, or I eat right, I'm going to be in that 30%. We don't realize that that's people who die suddenly, die young, die from accidents. Like that 30% covers a lot. That is not somebody who went to bed at 101 and didn't wake up.
Yes,
You know,
yes, with high life quality until the day they died. No, it's not. And the majority of us um, go through a phase called dwindling, and we lose function over time, whether we have dementia or not. We lose function, we lose quality of life, we lose abilities to function. And if we don't have a plan, it makes it a whole lot harder. That's a lot. I deal with that a lot in the book because uh, we know from the research that people going into this in any life limiting diagnosis, if you go into it in the know, or you learn about the disorder and you learn about how to plan, you're going to cope much, much better than if you go into it and stay in the dark. And so I really talk about, especially in the first section of the book, talk about how important it is to plan. And I give examples because I tell the story from my own personal experience. And pretty raw. It gets pretty raw at times, but I feel like it's important to be able to share that and to also share my insights and my resources that I came up with as a result of, as I said, getting another PhD and this time in dementia.
I say that a lot too. I say caregivers should get honorary PhDs because we have to learn medical stuff, legal stuff, financial stuff.
Yes.
Just it's like it doesn't matter. Like I am very artistic. I am not mathematically inclined unless you put dollar signs in front of it and a plus or a multiplication. Then I'm pretty good. Um, I don't know why the dollar sign makes math easier for me, but um, you know, it doesn't matter. You have to learn how to deal with all this stuff, or you're just gonna be ripping out your hair constantly, like your book says. Before I lose my own mind, which when you already feel that way when you're dealing with somebody with some form of dementia, and then when you have to deal with a medical system that's not prepared for this influx of people who need this kind of care, and
Mm.
you know lawyers are a little bit better, but still there's a lot of laws that haven't caught up to the disease.
Yeah, for sure.
um I don't know
And
if this is the case in all states, but I have I facilitate a support group, and one gal shared an article with us, the group, that you are not allowed to lock up somebody with dementia, like you cannot lock them into your house, even though if they get out into the yard and go trotting down the street, they don't have the mental capacity to avoid stepping out in front of a bus or not getting lost. So it's like, I understand you shouldn't lock up, you know, adults who have not committed crimes, but it's just for their safety. So that's, we still got some catching up to do there. So
We've got a lot of catching up to do, and it's more than catching up because there's a tsunami coming. We're living longer, and one of the non-modifiable causes of dementia is age. The other one's genetics. There are other modifiable causes of dementia, but those are the two biggies. And as we live longer, there's going to be more and more people with cognitive problems with dementia. And we're not even prepared for the 8 million that we have now. And that's going to double easily by 2050 is what the predictions are.
yeah, it's supposed to go up by 45% by 2030, which is like 2.5 years, or excuse me, 4.5 years. See, I told you I can't do math. I caught myself. Sometimes I have to reevaluate that goal. My paternal grandmother lived to 103, and up till about the last 9 months of her life, her mind was fine. She was mostly blind from glaucoma. Then about 101.5, she became really hard of hearing, which that had to be horrible. Like I can't imagine not really being able to see, not really being able to hear. Like I
Yeah,
think I
you
would have
feel
called it.
cut off, isolated.
Yeah, it's like being like I always said it was like, solitary confinement in your own brain. No, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And we know that isolation enhances in a bad way, aggravates dementia. And the more we know about hearing loss in particular, hearing loss is a huge contributing factor because even if we're around people, even if we're around in surroundings that are social, if we can't hear what's going on, we're as good as isolated. And you mentioned living to 103 until the last few months, and that sounds great, although like you, it doesn't sound that great to me anymore, because really we're talking about lifespan versus health span. And health span is how long we can live without fairly severe limitations in our activities of daily living. And most people, if you ask them to really consider what makes life worth living for you, and it's individualized, different people have different ideas about what makes life worth living. But what's important to you, what makes life worth living, if you can't do those things that are critically important to you anymore, then your health span is going to be decreased, whereas you might live a lot longer than your health span. And that's poor quality of life. So we have to think about that. How can we enhance people's health spans? So,
Oh,
for example,
mm-hmm.
pay for people's hearing aids.
Yeah, for
That
real.
would be a thing. That would be a great thing for Medicare to be.
Especially if it helped prevent dementias. Like,
Absolutely.
and I don't know why hearing aids are so expensive, but it's cheaper than dementia care. So
It sure is. And luckily they're coming down. Hearing aids, not dementia care. That's going up.
yeah, that's going up.
But luckily they're coming down and you can get them at Costco and things like that after an evaluation and they're more reasonable. But, I can get crutches from my insurance company, from Medicare, Medicaid if I break my leg, but I can't get hearing aids. I don't really understand that. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
And they don't cover dental care, which we also know is important for brain health.
Right. For sure. And cardiac health, for sure.
That's true. Yeah, it's interesting. So before we go on to that's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
We talked about why we're not good about asking for help. So it's cultural, which is what I believe. How do we go about getting past that, that culture, that feeling like I should be able to do it myself? This is my mom, this is my husband, this is my, my spouse, whatever. Part of it, I think, is in the beginning, you make some adaptations and it's more mentally hard because you're like, oh, they've got Alzheimer's. Okay. But in the beginning, you just make a few adaptations and then life goes on fairly normally. And then
Yes.
all of a sudden, it doesn't take very long, one thing leads to another, and next thing you know, you're up to your eyebrows and holy heck, how did my life end up here?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, one of the things that is really unfortunate, and we have to figure out how to change this, and Jason Karlawish, who's a neurologist at University of Pennsylvania, writes about this in his book, The Problem with Alzheimer's. He says, when you say you have Alzheimer's, the world leaves you and leaves your caregiver. We really do isolate people with that particular brain disorder much more so than we would isolate someone with cancer. We're all terrified of it. People are more scared of getting dementia. Not that it's catchy, you can't catch it, but people are more scared of getting dementia than they are heart disease and cancer combined. So we're terrified of it. So we tend to leave the scene if we can. We don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. Our loved one with dementia is my husband certainly did this. I only want you.
Mm.
I'm only comfortable with you. Part of that is, for a long time, they're aware of their limitations and they feel bad about them. They feel embarrassed and they feel most comfortable with the person they're most comfortable with. In my husband's case, it was me. Luckily, it was his daughter and my son as well. Um, but they feel most comfortable with us and they don't want any outsiders. But we have to, at some point, say, even if they don't want an outsider, it's time for me to get help. I waited way too long. I waited beyond the point where I needed somebody to come in and help me. And it was a godsend. She was a godsend. And Walt got used to her and began liking her and having fun with her pretty quickly. But initially, he didn't want anything to do with it. He hid upstairs.
Funny.
And that made me feel so guilty, like, oh, well, I don't need this, but I do need this. And we have to remind ourselves we do need this. And it's not only that we need to take care of ourselves, because if we don't take care of ourselves, how are we going to take care of our person?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's we ourselves are worth taking care of just because. And that's another thing I sort of help people come up with little self statements or little mantras that they can say, yeah, I'm worth taking care of. Just for me, I'm worth taking care of. Yeah.
Well, one thing that comes to mind is I'm worth taking care of so that my daughter doesn't have to take care of me.
Yeah.
And that might be the mindset that you need to use.
Yeah.
One of the things I recommend is bringing help in really early.
Yes.
And, you know, if you can afford it, great. If you can afford it and you can find it, great. But what I always suggest to people is make a list of everybody you know, and they don't have to be local or family. Just make the list of everybody you know. And then make a second list of, like today, write down all the tasks you have to do today. And then expand that to what do we have to do every week? And then throw in all the monthly things like, I get my nails done once a month. Whatever is on your to-do list required to maintain your household and your life.
Mhm.
And then match up the person on the list with the skill. And this is the
Mhm.
example I use all the time is like, please don't ask me to call insurance companies or banks. That stresses me out thinking about it. I do not like it. I do not like the hold music. I don't like their protocol. I don't like any of it. It does not flow with my my personal logical way of thinking things should be done. And I
Right.
don't like it when my, quick, cheap, effective method for handling something is thwarted by somebody's protocol. Make it
Right.
nuts.
Right.
You want somebody
This
to,
call may be recorded for quality purposes.
or they play some god awful music. It's just like the whole thing is just pure torture. But you need somebody to sit with your loved one, bring you food. I love to bake, but I cannot eat everything that I want to try. And my husband's on a sweet eater. So, hey, I'll bring you some sweet treats because we all know people with dementia love that. I can drive your loved one places, but God, please don't ask me to call and talk to the bank.
Right, right, right.
And
And what I if you do something similar to what I do, and I suggest that people keep a list of very small tasks that yeah, you could run to the grocery store and do that. You could go pick up the prescription. Yeah, you could, but keep a list by the phone because a lot of people will say, "Let me know if there's something I can do." And so this is like a little test case. You can give them something small and very doable. And some of those people will do those things and say, tell me what else I can do. Or they might say, well, I know you asked for this at the grocery store, but I also saw this was on sale and already prepared, so I got that for you too. And they get into it more. Whereas if you don't have a list, you go, oh, let me know if there's something I can do. And you go, okay, that's going to require me to pick up the phone and call you again and say, could you possibly do this? Oh, you're not, you're busy on Thursday. Oh, I understand. If I got a list right next to the phone, I can say, yes, as a matter of fact, could you do this? The other thing that does for you is if somebody is just being nice or trying to be nice and get off the phone quickly, let me know if there's something I can do. And you give them a task and they never follow through, then you know really they're not on your good list. At least
yeah.
not at this point.
Well, the other thing too is if you pair the person with an appropriate task, like have the
Yeah.
CPA or whoever taught
Yes.
this. Not me.
Yes.
We've already established that. You're not, they're not, feels less of a burden. And
Yep.
like if you ask me, oh God, can you call the insurance company? I don't know why you'd ask me to call your insurance company or can you help me with the bank? And be like, sure, I'll do my best. Just because I know, but if you ask me to do stuff that's already in my wheelhouse, things I'm already doing, it's not that much effort. And so
Yeah.
kind of similarly, I always tell people, if you know, hey, Jen likes to bake but needs like an outlet for the extras, and I say, well, hey, Beverly, I'm really sorry to hear about your husband. Is there anything I can do? You'd be like, you know what? I know you like to bake, so the next time you're baking, can you just bring us some of the leftovers? That'd be great. I'd be like, oh, yes, now I have an excuse to bake some more.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like I get to do something I enjoy. I'm doing something good for you guys. It's just, and I don't feel like I'm getting sucked in. You're not asking me like, oh, can you bake us sourdough bread every week or something
Right.
that's much more time consuming. And
Right.
then I'd be
Right.
more willing to be like, oh, hey, next time I bring over the chocolate chip cookies or whatever it is I decided to make, why don't you, take some time for yourself and I'll sit and, entertain your husband.
Yeah. Yes. And it does fold into it like that. And I think that's a very good way of doing it. And also, we tend not to, we don't like to ask, we don't like to accept the fact that we need help. And we also sometimes, especially with our loved ones, don't ask in a what I call a stand tall way or an assertive way. We sometimes guilt trip especially our family members, especially if they've been ignoring us. I was certainly guilt trip. I was certainly guilty of guilt tripping some of my stepdaughters because they weren't around very much. And that doesn't help, puts them on the defensive. It's
Mm-hmm.
helpful to say, here's my problem. Here's what I need. Can you help me out? If they say no, well, what is it that you can do? What can you do to help us? Um, Instead of lashing out at them or being a doormat and saying, oh gosh, I've got to do it all. I asked once and they said no. It's perfectly okay to ask again. Because back to our topic. Our topic is why do caregivers feel so alone? Part of it is that people are uncomfortable with dementia and they tend to move away. But part of it is that we feel that we're supposed to do it all ourselves. And our loved one wants us to be the one to do it all of ourselves. And it's just not possible. It's just not possible. And I love how you said, bring the help in earlier rather than later so that your loved one can get comfortable, sort of comfortable with the people and the help um, before they lose their ability to reason. Because Many people with dementia, most people with dementia do lose their ability to reason. And if you try to introduce somebody new at that point in the caregiver track, it's harder for them. And it will be harder for you, therefore. Yeah.
The other thing about bringing in like family, friends, neighbors early on is you're establishing kind of a new routine. Oh, hey, Jen brings baked goods a couple times a month and, stays and hangs out for, one of those 2 days or whatever the new scenario is. Cause none of us really like change, never really understood that, but that is kind of human. At least I know it's our culture. We're not real big on change, even if it's positive.
Right.
Kind of goofy, but um I this may sound terrible, but it's like I've had dogs all my life, which of course was the very first sentence of my mom's repetitive story. So I hate saying that, but dogs work on routine and pattern. They don't have like long-term memory like we do. And when you up and change their routine, they're not comfortable at first. They got to get used to it. And it's kind of the same thing with your loved one. It's like, if all of a sudden this new person who may not look like you or not familiar with, you're not familiar with them, is all of a sudden in your home doing things, that's like, ew. No, most people wouldn't like that. And so when you've got somebody who, like you said, can't rationalize what's going on, you're just asking for trouble. So bring it in early. Then you're not asking for help in an emergency when it's like you forget who's better at what.
Right.
You're desperate and like it's so much better. So like plan ahead. Planning is good. Not that we
Planning
always
is
do that, but
planning is so good. And we don't want to think about all of this. That's the last thing we want to do because we're exhausted and we're frightened and we're overwhelmed. But we do have to think about it all. And what I suggest to people is they think about it before they have to. I mean, it's 100% guaranteed that we're all going to die.
yep.
But only 35% of us have wills, and only 65% of us have living wills. And the only reason that's higher is because the hospital, if you go in the hospital, they make you do a living will nowadays. We don't plan. We feel like it, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it with our loved ones. We don't want to think about it for ourselves. But like you said, that most of us are going to go through a period toward the end of our life where we are going to need help. And if we have that planned, it's going to go a whole lot better for us than if we don't have that planned.
And
And
what
I'm bad at planning.
yeah. Yes, who do you want to make decisions for you? You or somebody else? One of the things I've learned doing this show is, and I don't know if you guys did this in the beginning, but talk about, like we've talked about, like I make the joke, my family's got morbid sense of humors. We've talked about like my daughter and I want to be cremated, but I think starting in 2027, I always have to look it up. California will do the um green burial, which is also known as human composting, which is definitely not a good marketing term.
It's not a good marketing term.
No, not at all. But knowing what I know about cremation, it's like I'm really leaning more towards the other thing. And because we've already discussed it, it's kind of easy to say, hey, oh, actually, we went from cremation to being turned into trees. But now there's the option of human composting. So it's like, hey, do we want to be composted and like be able to do multiple trees, or do we want to be one tree? Like, so we can have
Oh,
these
wow.
goofy conversations. And once you've started it's like not that traumatic.
Yes. Yes.
My daughter's in her 30s. We're in my husband turned 60 last year. So, but in our 50s, we're having these conversations well before hopefully anything needs to be dealt with. But if you have a diagnosis and you talk about how you would like to be cared for, where you want to live, all those details. And then, like my mom always said, well, I don't want to be a burden, but I'm going to live forever in my home. It's like, guess what, honey? Those are mutually exclusive. Have we
Yes.
talked about what would
Yeah.
happen if you can't live in your home without somebody there to cook for you, clean, all those things? Maybe she would have made a different choice. And why the
Yes.
hell we never discussed what would happen with my mom if my dad died first? My dad was not healthy.
Mm.
Like, my
Mhm.
family was the poster child for, "We're not going to talk about it. No, no."
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what's interesting? I'm finding that more and more people are willing and interested in talking about end of life issues. When the collective, we host things like death and dying discussions. We have death cafes now where people host um, a coffee hour talking about issues of death. I teach a class for Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. It's specific to dementia, but it talks a lot about end of life as well. Um, and that class is packed. People are wanting, now that doesn't mean the whole population is wanting to talk about, but I think we're starting to turn a little bit into we need to think about this more. We need to do some more planning. It's hard to talk about these topics, but so important. One of the best things we did when my husband was diagnosed, and he was diagnosed early on because he felt like something was wrong, but he didn't seemed to anybody else like something was wrong. And he felt like something was wrong. We went to a neurologist and we had a spinal tap, a lumbar puncture, and we had the fancy test for it's called an amyloid tau protein ratio test. And it did confirm an Alzheimer's diagnosis. But he was far, far from losing his capacity to reason or plan. And we sat around the table with his four daughters, my son, all together collectively. We talked about what he wanted and what he didn't want, and what he wanted as time went on, and what he didn't want. And he talked in great detail about end of life choices as well. We documented all of that stuff, and we gave a copy to every one of the kids so that they knew what he wanted. There was no question about what he wanted. And I think that was so useful, so helpful, particularly at the end of life. Yeah.
Well, then you don't have because you said you have stepdaughters, so you're not like, well, it's my father. And so, well, you don't end up with those weird family dynamics manifesting in the most negative, unhelpful ways possible, which always seems to be the case. That right there is a perfect example of why you should talk about it. And I'm assuming you guys had multiple conversations. It wasn't just one and done.
No, it wasn't. And that's a great point that you bring up, because if if I can get people to have these conversations, and if I can get people to do an advance directive, a living will, um, for example, my sister, it was very difficult to get her to consider all of this and to do a living will. Um, we think we're really just like, okay, one and done. But really, it's not a one and done process, because our circumstances change over time.
Mhm.
Like you said, your dad passed away. And oh, we didn't plan on that. We might have had some plans in place, but we didn't plan on that. And you have to revisit it. In fact, I don't know if you knew this, but there's a national day now identified, I think it's just a couple of weeks ago, to update and reconsider and update your living wills and all of those kind of documents. And I think it's a great idea
Yeah, I'll have
because,
to look that up.
yeah, because things happen, you know?
That is true. Yeah, circumstances change. little more than 5 years ago, we didn't think we'd have a pandemic that kept everybody at home. Like, I
Yes.
always marveled because my paternal grandmother was born in 1918, so technically she lived through two pandemics.
Wow.
The
Yeah.
very beginning and the very end of her life. She died in April of 21. So,
Wow. Yeah. She
um,
sure did, didn't she?
yeah, I don't think she remembered either one of them because,
She was very young, very old.
yeah, I don't know. She was pretty with it in the fall of 2020. And then kind of I think she was having many strokes.
Hmm.
And early in 21, she wasn't doing well. And it was like, well, she got to 103. Her birthday was the end of March, died at the beginning of April. I always get confused because the queen's husband died like 3 days after my
Oh.
grandmother. So I always thought that was kind of interesting because she was always very proper, especially when my grandfather was alive. But we did our trust during the pandemic. And that's when I learned, because I was like, oh gosh, we're just so terrible. We're in our 50s and we haven't done this. And the lawyer's like, oh no, most people haven't done this. And I was like,
Most people haven't.
I'm like, I said, I'll be the poster child for explaining why this is so important and why it needs to be clear. My parents' trust was very clear that if my dad died first, everything went to my mom. What wasn't so clear is what we were going to do with the trust if my mom was incapacitated, which was the case. We actually had to pay an elder law attorney to read through the documents. Not that my sister and I are stupid. I have a 4-year degree. She's got an MBA. But you're grieving and you're trying to figure out what the hell to do with your mother. And my sister and I don't agree on anything. So, very heightened emotions.
Hmm.
And fortunately, like page 11, he found where it said what we were what the scenario was in the situation that we were in. So it was like,
Yeah.
well, thank God we don't have to go to court because that
Oh,
would have
yeah.
been a nightmare. And
And
when we
people
were
do.
doing our trust, our attorney said, well, what would happen with your estate if your daughter went first? My daughter has autoimmune disease. And I was like, excuse me, but that's a very rude question. And he
But
goes,
they're paid to ask rude questions.
and he's like, but I have to ask. And I was
Sure.
like, oh, well, I don't know. She had a husband at the time. Well, she still has him. His family, I'm not sure they would know what to do if somebody handed them $2 at once. It just never been good with money, not healthy people, physically, not, otherwise. And I get all in my head, well, if she dies first and we give him the money and his family gets money grabber and get their blah, blah, and it's just like my brain is spinning. And it's like one day I was coming down the stairs out of my office and I was like, I'll be dead. I won't care. And so I looked at him and I said, you'll get the estate. Don't make me come back and haunt you because you've done something stupid. And he's like, okay. End of brain spinning. And so he knows exactly how I feel. And the question is answered. All, it's like, oh, I guess it's not that really a big a deal. But you get all like, you just overthink it to death. So it's
Yeah.
just crazy. But
Yeah. And I have a friend going through that right now in setting up her trust. Like, ooh, does this child need more because they have special needs, and how do I put that in, and what's that going to do to the family dynamics, and on and on and on and on. One thing that my husband did, my husband was an economist, so he was, math, economy.
he could talk to the bank and the insurance companies for
To the bank and stuff. He could do that. Yeah, and he loved that. So that was good, but of course then he lost that ability. But early on, right after his diagnosis, and remember, he still had decisional capacity, he still had good reasoning. Early on, we hired a financial planner. And he said, and I respected him so much for this. We didn't know these people. That they came very highly recommended, but we didn't know them. And he said to them, I don't need help yet, but I'm going to because I have Alzheimer's disease. And I thought, wow, that's a brave thing to do, but it was so useful to me. And those people have been so helpful to me along the way. And do you know that the head of the company came to my husband's memorial gathering, stayed the entire time, and he invites me to give guest talks at his place about dementia and stuff like that. They're almost more like a family. Yes, I'm paying them, but they're worth every cent. And people don't realize you can have a financial planner without having $1 million. And it's to your advantage because they look out for you. If you have the right financial planner, of course. So that was a gift that Walt gave to me early in his diagnosis. And I really appreciate that too. You don't have those gifts unless you're willing to talk about it with your family.
true.
Yeah.
So are you comfortable sharing what some of his desires for care as his disease progressed, what wishes he expressed?
I am comfortable sharing, and my book talks a lot about it. And I will just say, sort of in a nutshell, because, well, you're watching the time. I don't have to watch the time.
That's true. We got a few
You
more
let me
minutes.
know when I need to quit yapping. But when my husband was first diagnosed, he said, "Well, I'll just shoot myself."
Ooh.
Ah, I
No
know.
way.
I know. And I said, I didn't think we all say crazy things when we're in the height of being shocked, etc. And I didn't think he was going to do that, but I said, we got to talk about this. And we did have a gun in the house. There was a gun in the back of the closet that I've never touched because for me, a gun is if you touch it, it explodes in your face. I don't know. Not comfortable with them. We did get rid of the gun. And I said, I will help you in your planning of a peaceful end of life, but I will not condone any kind of violence. And we looked into various things. We looked into Dignitas in Switzerland, and they do a medical assisted dying in Switzerland for people with dementia as long as they still have decisional capacity. He decided not to do that, but he did decide that at the end of life, when he was in stage 6, there are 7 stages of dementia. And the 7th stage is the terminal stage. But in stage 6, you really having a lot of trouble.
Hmm.
And he said, at that point, if I can't feed myself, I don't want you to feed me. So no spoon feeding. And that was in his advanced care directive. I didn't know if I could pull that. I didn't know if I could allow myself to do that, you know, if it came to that. But that's what he wanted, and he put that in there, no spoon feeding. And he also said no antibiotics at that point and beyond. So if he got a UTI, urinary tract infection, which is very common,
Yep.
uh, as we age and as we become more frail, he said no antibiotics and no antibiotics for
No.
pneumonia or any kind of respiratory infection. Why is that important? Is because we can keep people alive.
Hmm.
We can keep the heck out of them alive in the ICU. But at that point, their quality of life is so low that he decided early on these are things that are important to me. When I can no longer recognize myself as self, when I can no longer recognize my wife as Beverly, when I can no longer recognize my kids, whether I remember their name or not, if I can't recognize them, I don't want to be alive. And that's stage 6 going into stage 7. So he had it all set up legally. Now, luckily, we didn't have to do any of that because his heart stopped.
Mm.
Uh, but and it's interesting because he was very he was sort of a compulsive, obsessive. He was definitely an obsessive guy, and he would always say, "I don't think I'm going to be alive a year from now." And I would say, "What do you think's going to kill you?" And would say, "I don't know. I think my heart's going to stop." And doggone it, he was right.
That's wild. That's
It is wild. There is a phenomenon called near-death awareness that end-of-life doulas speak about, that they observe in people that have a terminal illness, and it could be 6 months away or 3 weeks away. They'll say, I think I'm not going to be alive 3 weeks from now. And they are often right. Isn't that
it
fascinating?
is really crazy.
There's a lot of stuff we can't explain.
That is true. Well, this has been fantastic, and I definitely recommend the book because it sounds like there's lots of great advice. We probably could have talked for a whole other hour.
Well, do it again.
That's where it works for me. So I appreciate Beverly coming on and sharing her story. The name of her book is Before I Lose My Own Mind. It is linked in the show notes, so you guys can just go and order it. And it sounds like I said, perfect read, and definitely be having conversations and asking for help, because one thing I didn't mention is that 50% of caregivers pass away before their loved one. And if you're over the age of 65, that goes up to 70%. That is atrocious. So don't be in that group. Get help, stay healthy so that you can be there for your loved one all the way to the end.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Beverly.